Welcome back, everyone, to the AI Healthcare Podcast. I'm your host, Dylan Reed, and today we're joined with medical affairs expert and my friend, Luisa Scott. Thank you so much for your time, Luisa.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Dylan. I really appreciate it. It'll
Of
be
course.
fun.
And how would you define, because it seems to me that there are some similarities and differences between public affairs, medical affairs, regulatory affairs. Like, what are the key similarities and differences between those three terms?
Yeah, I think so. In truth, how these divisions play out can be a little bit different at each company, but in general, um, you know, medical affairs is fairly focused on the kind of the external, well, there's sort of two aspects of medical affairs that kind of play out. So one of them is, the field medical team is kind of part of providing non-promotional information for, healthcare providers that may be, interested in learning more and digging more into the data. That's kind of dictated by the Sunshine Act. So that's kind of one component of medical affairs. I think as we move forward into the future, one of the sort of growing and in importance and also in team size in medical affairs is sort of that kind of dive into uh, like maybe early stage launch and kind of post market data collection to kind of understand better how to whatever product this may be, you know who's really benefiting from this, patient wise, and really providing that data for, kind of basically how to help patients the most, right? In the most efficient way, or who's really the best population and really gaining the most benefit from this and understanding that aspect of things.
And so, it's we're kind of on this cusp of like technological innovation, specifically with AI, kind of being that leading driver of technological innovation in healthcare. Like, um, just to kind of get some like understand, like how was medical affairs understood like pre AI, and how is it understood now? Like, what are the changes that you've seen?
Yeah, I think there's a couple different areas that this can be utilized. And I think those kind of play out in those two structures I set up, right? So, like, what is your field medical team doing? What kind of insights are they gathering from clinicians? Um, and kind of integrating that data that they're collecting into strategic plans for where the company is headed and how the product is utilized and kind of understanding all of that. That's kind of one aspect is just the use of that's basically your data warehouse that you're looking at, and the utilization of AI algorithms to kind of best integrate that data into a strategic method, and being able to do that more quickly
Mhm.
than has previously been done. So that's kind of one utilization. I think the other one, and is really of interest to me, and I think it's really of interest in the sort of medical affairs community in general, is this kind of utilization of um, external to the company real world data sources. So things like electronic health records and claims records, and kind of digging into those data sources to um, learn a number of different things, right? So it could be that you're just sort of interested in getting a feel for, again, who's using the product, who's benefiting from the product, how it's changing outcomes for patients, um, and kind of digging into that. And theoretically, you could even do some sort of comparative analysis. And utilization of this real world data, I think, is becoming more accessible with the kind of advancement of AI algorithms for digging through that type of data.
Hmm. So, because so based off of kind of what you're saying, so medical affairs, it's kind of being much more towards kind of a data-driven role?
I think that is the way it is headed in the future. There is certainly, there's quite a bit of component of it presently that will continue to be there. That is also one of those sort of soft touch aspects with clinicians and patient advocates and such.
Now, what has been kind of the, um, I don't like to use the word challenge, but kind of what has been the big struggle into getting medical affairs understood amongst key stakeholders in the healthcare ecosystem?
Yeah, I think there's a few ways that this can be a struggle. I think that, from a big picture perspective, just understanding the value that medical affairs is providing to the organization, right? So a lot of the value of medical affairs is by nature somewhat external facing, right? It's to help make sure that we're helping patients in the right way, and that we're, making the best utilization of products for them. And, kind of tying that into how that affects your commercial strategies can sometimes be a bit of a challenge, right? So your field team is out collecting insights, and if you can't kind of put some metrics on how those insights are shaping strategy, then it can be difficult to kind of, tout the value of medical affairs. I do think that that's one of the ways that, again, these sort of AI-based technologies, really, they're just sort of methods of dealing with a lot of data and crunching that data and making it more available in real time. But those are some ways that can not only bring value to the medical affairs organization, but also help to show that value more strategically.
Mhm.
Um,
And
yeah.
and you brought up an interesting point about KPIs or key performance indicators. What what are like what are like common KPIs, either how medical affairs was understood pre-AI and how it's understood now? Like, have those KPIs changed?
I certainly cannot speak for all medical affairs. To my knowledge, these have not changed substantially. I think, really just counting, a lot of it has to do with touch points with healthcare providers. There are various ways that those are ranked and counted, but that's typically the type of thing that's measured, is how much, face time, if you will, did you have with how many providers. Um, and with the idea that, one of the main roles of medical affairs in that provider facing role is education around the product and dissemination of scientific information. So that's certainly a thing that I think, like I said, I don't know, and I'm not claim super expertise in this area, but I don't know that won't necessarily change, like, the metrics that are used, but in terms of more readily being able to see how they're influencing things in terms of strategy and kind of internal learnings may be accelerated by the utilization of some of these technologies and algorithms.
Yeah. And what have you seen kind of on the state level in Texas when it comes to the utilization of medical affairs as a field?
I don't I don't know that it's different in Texas per se, that, like, medical affairs specifically. I think, I live in Austin, where from, like, an industry perspective, there's certainly a big focus on the sort of merging of healthcare technologies and the utilization of AI. Um, Honestly, whether it's in the healthcare industry or not, right now in Austin, most of the job postings have AI somewhere in the title.
Mhm.
I know that's true in many places, but it's really particularly true here. So that is a big focus going forward. And I think that we may see hopefully we'll see for the sake of Austin, that like this becomes one of those sort of epicenters of the growth of that kind of technology.
And, because Austin, being from Texas, I remember when it was like this small, like little town, like you had UT, you had 6th Street, and that was like basically it. But like it's amazing, like it's become like this hotbed of kind of what you were saying of technological innovation.
Yeah, I think there's been a focus. I mean, I've been here for over 20 years now. And I've certainly seen a huge shift in things and kind of this focus on building out kind of the biotech industry in Austin. And recently, that's really taken the shape of what I was talking about, which is that utilization of AI in healthcare, particularly health tech solutions, and merging those together. I've seen a lot of early stage companies start up here in that area, and I think that's partly because that is a focus from the policy side. The policymakers and people influencing policy are really trying to support that type of innovation, and those relationships between industry and universities, like the University of Texas in particular. There's a big sort of AI group there that's now forming out, and kind of helping to get those pushed out into the industry side of things.
And how do you see, kind of, since you're in Austin, like how do you see Austin contributing to the greater conversation of kind of this, what you've been describing perfectly, is like kind of this intersection between medical affairs and AI moving forward?
Yeah, I think one of the areas that I've kind of had some interesting conversations with people here around, and perhaps solutions will come from this area, is in kind of that side of medical affairs, or just data, evidence generation in general. That's kind of digging into things like electronic health records and claims databases. I do know a group here, for example, that provides solutions really on the healthcare organization side, where they're kind of integrating all of that data for the healthcare organization to use themselves, right? So if they want to understand how their patient outcomes are doing in a particular area, that's being used, to kind of integrate across systems that frankly are not interoperable. So healthcare records are not with each other necessarily interoperable between systems, and certainly claims databases are a whole different beast. And bringing those all together and trying to make them seem seamless is a challenge, and it is one of those areas where this type of algorithm-based data cleaning and data integration is really comes out. And I think that's an area I'm interested in. It's an area that's not just on the healthcare organization side, but also on the kind of manufacturer side. We're understanding, again, the same sorts of questions. How are patient outcomes being influenced by the utilization of X, Y, or Z? Are there different population differences that you can see out of that? All of these questions can kind of come from that data set in a way that is very different from a clinical study that is controlled. It's a different beast, right? It does give you kind of some different information in a clinical study, because you do have typically some sort of placebo or control that you don't have in that real world data. But the real world data does bring its own aspect in, which is an understanding of actually how things are working out in real life.
Because it's interesting, because you brought up a great point. So it seemed like 1996, under the Clinton administration, when EHRs started to become, I guess, to put it loosely, like mainstream, I guess you could say.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Did and yet again, I'm going to preface this by saying I did not have any memory or knowledge, because I was so young in 1996. Did people not think like, oh, well, you can measure this data on like your phone or your watch? Like, was there not like, did people not question maybe this is a good data set or this is a bad data set based off of the source that this data is coming from? Like, were those questions not really thought of at the time?
I think there was a progression of technology that had to happen before we could get to kind of the place we're at now. So um, the first aspect is that, the kind of original electronic health records were pretty siloed. There wasn't such a thing as, an entire integrated delivery network having the same EHR, or the whole hospital system having the same EHR. These were sort of office by office implementations. Um, and it can still be that way to some extent, but there's certainly a big push to kind of integrate things and have a lot more interconnectedness between these systems, and a lot less siloing. It's not perfect at all. It's still actually quite a mess, but that needed to happen before we can even get to the place that we are now. And even things like computing power and the sort of even AI algorithms and understanding how to build those out to effectively probe these data sets has advanced tremendously just in the last decade. So there's been a huge amount of change that's come about to kind of make some of these things even possible, right? Like, these are, at least from a theoretical standpoint, really huge data sets that are really, really messy, right? So even down to identifying who a patient is within the system, in you're not just integrating one data stream in one field where the patient identifier is, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? You need to find what the patient identifier, which is probably not the same across all these different, EHR and claims sources, to find and understand that, okay, this patient that has 5 different identifiers in these 5 different systems is in fact the same person. And that's just a huge amount of computing power, but also just a kind of an understanding of how to build out these algorithms efficiently to probe that kind of information.
Now, would you say we're still like at the elementary stages of this?
Probably in 10 years, the answer to that question is yes. Right? We'll look back and say, oh yeah, we were just figuring things out. And I do think that there's probably, and this is not just in the field of like healthcare data, but in general, there's probably a overexcitement over the level of things that we can do with this at the moment. But I do think that, as we move forward, there will be advances. I think one of the other things is, as we move forward and legislation does, as you brought up with the, EHR, basically the sequential sort of legislation that pushed EHRs to happen, and even how these EHRs are supposed to talk to each other is legislated, right? As we move forward, hopefully we can build in some aspects to our policies that really are in favor of being able to have good data sets, right? From how these systems are interacting and talking to each other, which does influence how that data analysis goes and how well it goes, to having a bit more uniformity from EHR to EHR system or claim systems. So, I mean, it'll kind of be interesting to see how that plays out going forward.
And you brought up policy and you also brought up legislation. Like, what is one thing that you would want state leaders in Austin, as well as members of Congress, to understand about medical affairs? Or what do they not understand?
Um, I'm not sure about medical affairs specifically, but in terms of like some of the data that we're talking about, I think I do think that in order to really utilize these real world data sets, which in the end, I do think is really useful for patients, right? There are some really great things that can come out of this, from clinical decision support tools that are kind of utilizing these big data sets that can improve patient outcomes, to understanding, again, who the right patient is for drug X, or treatment Y. So I think there's a huge amount of benefit that can come for patients, but there are also huge impediments, right? And I think having some experts and honestly more experts than me in sort of how these data sets come together. I know there's a lot of discussion out there about again the method of communication between these different platforms that really influences the analysis, and kind of having expert leadership there influence some of the policies and decision making, I think would be really beneficial.
And how would you like to contribute to the field of medical affairs? Like, how would you want to leave your mark on the field?
Yeah, so I think I'm really interested in that sort of evidence generation side of things, and ways that we can learn to be able to help patients in a way that is really evidence based and informed by the data, and by um, both the data from a sort of scientific perspective, and also the data from like what are clinicians actually doing, and how are patients actually thinking about this, because those sort of softer touch aspects of things really do influence how you make decisions for um,
Hmm.
again, which treatment or drug, etc., or
Hmm.
where the education needs to be, like where we're not doing it this way, which it looks like is probably the best. Where is the gap in knowledge? How can we best educate clinicians and patients to really make sure that we are, helping patients in the best way possible?
So you're kind of indirectly arguing not like doing like a total 360 of medical education in the United States, but kind of really looking hard of like, is what we've been doing, is it still the correct way to meet the needs of patients?
Yeah, I think there are some really cool, and this is not exactly my area, but I do kind of follow along and talk to people about this. There's some really cool techniques that have come out, um, and I guess some of them are really probably fundamentally somewhat based on these like AI sort of things, or just algorithm generation in general. That's kind of is sort of changing some of medical education, right? There are some like really interactive or somewhat interactive types of uh, courses or classes, as it were, where you can earn CME doing these somewhat interactive types of things. And I do think that those, we know from just in general didactic principles, that level of interaction is important for learning. So I think that that is one way that things are changing and have been changing.
So, and where can people find more about you, Louisa?
I suppose one could look me up on LinkedIn and reach out to me that way. Um, I am not super active on LinkedIn or social media in general, but yeah, I mean anyone who wants to learn more or connect, I do look at that. It's a good way.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you again for your time, Louisa. It's much appreciated. Feel free to find me also on LinkedIn. Also write the AI healthcare report that's released every week, as well as release podcast episodes on my podcast, the AI healthcare podcast, um, twice twice a month. So there's usually an episode at the beginning of the month and then an episode at the end of the month. This is Dylan Reed signing off. Thank you again for your time, Lisa.
Thank you so much.